Welcome to the Tweak of the Week. I'm Tommy Larkin, owner and chief experience officer of Optimal Movement, Fitness, and Yoga. And today we look at every shoemaker's favorite pose, Cobbler's pose, or butterfly pose, but best known in yoga as Baddha Konasana. Hey there and welcome back. This week we are continuing our look at opening the hips and keeping those aches and pains away by stretching the inner thighs with the pose Baddha Konasana. Baddha Konasana resembles the position a cobbler would sit in to make shoes. We also know it as butterfly and is a mainstay exercise in schools and a warm-up for sporting activities. Baddha Konasana is a great pose and has many benefits to it. It aids in developing strength in the back, abdominal region, and the bladder. Plus, we gain better use and capability in our external hip rotators, especially the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, tensor fasciae lata, and sartorius, which is the longest muscle in the human body. In addition, Baddha Konasana is beneficial for menstruation issues and during pregnancy for preparing the hips for delivery. Now, with proper consideration of your own abilities in the position, the pose is accessible to all levels of practitioner. In thinking about Baddha Konasana, I realized there are several questions that arise when doing the pose. The first is relative to the feet, and do you hold the feet or the big toes? And the answer is actually dependent on the teacher and how they learn to teach the posture. The simpler answer is you can do either. More important is to understand, not to pull the toe side of the foot away from the floor. Because the legs are externally rotated, by lifting the toes, you are countering the rotation from the hips and trying to then internally rotate the legs from the feet. As a result, it puts adverse strain on the knees. Another question which arises is why my knees will not touch the floor. And this has to do with a couple of factors. The first being general tightness in the inner thigh and overly strong internal hip flexors. However, we also have to take into consideration the specific shape of your pelvis, including the positioning, depth, and orientation of your hip socket in relation to the femur bone and how they articulate with one another. Depending on these factors, your legs may not easily rotate openly or externally. As a result, any combination of these elements may keep your knees from reaching the floor. But simply practicing the pose more frequently and with diligence will help those knees potentially come closer to the ground. More important is to not focus on getting them down, but to work on opening and releasing the inner groins. Now, a quick note here. Depth in a pose does not necessarily mean that you are more proficient or that you are more advanced in a pose. Working within your muscular and skeletal capabilities and diligently working both mentally and physically to become better in a given pose is actually more important. In fact, recognizing your limitations and striving to reasonably overcome them, this is the sign of becoming more advanced in your practice. So let's get to doing Baddha Konasana. Now, you may need a blanket and or a block to work with today's tweak. The first thing to consider in Baddha Konasana is where your knees are in space relative to your hip points. So come to a sitting position on the floor. Stretch the legs out in front of you into Dandasana. Now bend the knees, bringing the feet close to the hips. Keeping the soles of the feet together, externally rotate the thighs, allowing the knees to open away from each other. Draw the feet into the hips, attempting to touch the heels to the pubic bone. If your knees come to the ground and you can sit upright without difficulty, you will not need to do the next step. Just hold tight for a moment. If the top of your knees are above the hip points, or you have to round the back to stay seated upright, you will need to elevate your hips. Using your block or blanket appropriately, fill in the distance between the floor and the outer condyle of the knee. This is the ideal height on which to sit. If one knee is obviously higher than the other, measure on the higher of the two knees. Now bring the knees back together and place the prop under your hips. Then bend the knees and draw the feet close to the hips. Keeping the soles of the feet together, Externally rotate the thighs, allowing the knees to open away from each other. Draw the feet into the hips and your support. If you are sitting on the floor or a very little height, wrap the hands around the toes and without pulling up on the feet, lift the chest into a cow-like position. If you are sitting on a prop and cannot reach your feet, either hold the front of the shins or ankles or simply rest your hands on the top of your knees, palms facing up. Now do cat in the belly and cow in the chest. Make sure to draw the front ribs back towards the hips. You would desire to hold this position for 2 to 5 minutes or more, breathing evenly with easy, full breaths. Because this is just a quick sample, after the next exhale, as you inhale, release the hold of your hands and use them to lift the knees together. Exhale, stretch the legs out into Dandasana. Take several breaths here, feeling the inner thighs descend towards the floor. Wonderful and great job. Now, each time you come back to the pose, if you have been using a prop to elevate the hips, retest that height. With time and diligence in the practice, hopefully the level you need should become less and less. Now, I hope today's tweak helps you find more opening in your inner thighs and gain more increased strength in your torso. Thank you so much for joining me today, and until next time, have an amazing week and be excellent to each other.